I would like to introduce Chris to those who don't know him. Briefly, he has specifically told me make a brief intro, so I will try to be brief. So Chris Laszlo is a professor of organizational behavior at Weatherhead School of Management at Case Western Reserve University. And this is where he's teaching and researching about flourishing enterprise. So he's the author of several books, Quantum Leadership, Flourishing Enterprise, Embedded Sustainability and Sustainable Value, all published by Stanford University Press. So his research has been published in a range of journals, such as Organizational Dynamics, Sustainability, the European Financial Review, the Journal of Management, Spirituality and Religion, and the Engaged Management Review. Chris is also a fellow of the International Academy of Management and past chair of the Management and Spirituality and Religion track at EON. So I like what he asked me to add, which I share part of it. Growing up in the Swiss Alps, Chris became a lifelong nature enthusiast and runs on forest trails wherever he can. Voilà. So I really welcome you very warmly, Chris. It's a pleasure to have somebody like you attend this series of research seminar by the Center of Wisdom and Leadership at SPJIMR, Bombay in India. So welcome, namaste, bonsoir, bonjour, and all yours.
Thank you, Surya, and thank you, Varun, as well, for hosting and for your kind words. So welcome to all here to this workshop on the future of corporate sustainability. So by sustainability here, we mean a business strategy that works in harmony with people and all life on Earth now and for future generations. So I may say right up front, I'm really looking forward to co-exploring this topic with you. Wayne Visner, who is with us today, was on one of the speakers at a webinar 3 days ago with the interesting title, Is Sustainability a Sham? And just the title of that seminar from a few days ago tells you that there's a certain discomfort that exists around this word. And at that webinar, participants shared a sense that business and society are perhaps at a crossroads now. And the question is, where do we go from here? I want to share a little personal observation. Having been in this for a good 25, 30 years, I've heard this notion of crossroads. Stu Hart actually wrote a book called At the Crossroads, probably 10 years ago. So it seems like every year we say we are at a critical threshold and so on. Is this one any different? And where do we go from here? So that's sort of some of the context for what we'll be doing. So in this workshop, I'll share my views on corporate sustainability, how it's evolved, and some of the challenges ahead. And then there'll be an opportunity for everyone to share their views and to engage in the exploration of key questions. So with that, let's get going. Future of corporate sustainability, again, with great thanks to the Center for Wisdom and Leadership at SPJIMR. So, a lot of what we'll cover is based on 25 years of research and practice in my Department of Organizational Behavior at the Weatherhead School of Management at Case Western Reserve University. You see here, we have done research and then published the research on topics like embedded sustainability, sustainable value, women in business management, flourishing enterprise, resident leadership, quantum leadership, Coaching and Compassion, the work of my colleague Richard Boyatzis, The Business of Building a Better World by David Cooperrider. And some of these works have, I think, really helped shape the field of corporate sustainability. So this is over the past 25 years. Now, really, what I want to share here with you is one key trend that I've seen emerge over these 25 years that is shaping corporate sustainability in ways that are good and bad. So you'll be happy to hear, I'm sure very often you hear speakers say, I have the following 10 trends I want to share, okay? I'm not doing that. I'm saying I have one key trend. And you'll see why I think it's so both encouraging and discouraging at the same time. So in the 1990s, late 1990s, we really started seeing this whole area of attention in the business world, which was formulated as corporate social responsibility and greening. And unfortunately, it was often bolt on. You had a manager for CSR that was attached to human resources or marketing. Many of you may remember that. And it was often symbolic in the sense that it was not core business. It was not really how the business itself was run, but sort of pilot projects or unique products or services. So that was at the start. And then what happened? We then saw growth in this notion of shared value, shareholder and stakeholder value. Michael Porter at Harvard made it something better known under the heading of shared value. But unfortunately, in practice, it was still primarily aimed at doing less harm. And then we had John Ehrenfeld and others really developed this notion of flourishing and contrast it with sustainability of shared value, where it was focused on positive impact, doing well, living life to the fullest, not just about surviving. And that has been now around for a number of years. So in addition to doing less harm, we now see incremental positive impact. And then more recently, really just in the last few years, we've seen, I would say, almost an explosion in discussion about net positive, regenerative, restorative strategies. And many of these are aimed at system-wide positive impact. So as you can see, what is the trend? The trend is that in the business world, it is moving progressively to more and more ambitious sustainability strategies, or strategies that are not just reducing negatives, but also contributing positive, contributing to restoring or regenerating nature, contributing to improving human well-being, contributing to broader prosperity in the communities in which companies work. And it's important to notice this is not a side gig, okay, for a few companies. You've got in 2020, the CEO, Doug McMillon, publicly committed Walmart to becoming a regenerative company. IKEA has committed to becoming regenerative by 2030. Big food companies like Nestle and Danone are committing to regenerative agriculture. And so it's something that is now something that had entered the business lexicon. And even if a business doesn't use the term regenerative, now it probably will, as it faces customer, investor, and competitor pressures in the years ahead. Now, in one sense, this is good for society because it means that expectations of business are rising, right? Investors, customers, employees, watchdogs, we all expect more business. It's no longer enough just to reduce an eco footprint or to minimize human rights or minimize employee stress. What they're expected to do now is to make, as I said, a positive and if possible, a system-wide positive impact. But in another sense, we have a problem. Houston, we have a problem. Earth, we have a problem, okay? And what that problem is that there's a growing gap between what all these companies are promising in terms of regenerative and what they're actually able to deliver, which is just trying to reduce harm. So there's this growing gap, and it's going to risk the credibility of many businesses in the years ahead when stakeholders find out in 5 or 10 years that these businesses have been singing the song of regeneration, but delivering at best business as usual with perhaps a little less harm. So that's kind of the context. This one key trend, keep that in mind, because I think that's going to shape the future of corporate sustainability in important ways. So what we're going to do now is there's 3 pretty much equal parts to what I want to cover with you. The first state of play is really a overview of corporate sustainability today. Is business building a better world, raises leadership and societal challenges given the state of play, and future directions is intended to offer insights into how businesses and researchers can practically engage people and organizations in system-wide transformation. So let me stop sharing for a moment here and just say gallery view so I can see all of you. You know, we had a little exchange, Surya and I and his colleagues, we had a little exchange before this. You know, we talked about the Dharma, the concept of Dharma in the Mahabharata, and some principles that Paul Hawken had in terms of needing to really do things that are good for the planet, good for people, regenerate things that move us towards more flourishing rather than less flourishing. So being clear about the end point is important. And I think we can all be in agreement that what we want is more than just survival. We want to be able to live life to the fullest, to grow well, to be in harmony with the world around us, and not to sacrifice the opportunities for future generations. But what's becoming clear to many of you, all of us in this space, is that it's difficult to engage people in this conversation now. So many people feel overwhelmed. There's disinformation. There is a sense that it's too late. They feel like frozen, like deer in the headlights. And so what I want to do is a little bit today, I'd like us to inquire together, what is the best way for scholars to engage the academic community in taking action, lasting action to make a difference, by including notions of science, but also living wisdom, you know, to echo what Varun and Surya were saying about the need to really bring in living wisdom into business as a guide for transforming individuals and allowing individuals and organizations to take action for system-wide change, because that's where we are. That's what is needed. Okay, so keep your eye on that as we go forward. So starting with this quick overview of where we are, the good news is that there are many companies that are now competing on the basis of making a positive impact on society and the environment. So if in fast-moving consumer goods, you see Unilever, Natura, Dabur in India, McCormick, IKEA with their people and planet positive strategy. In the energy world, Ørsted, in India, you have Adani Renewables, Schneider Electric, Tesla. To some extent, all of these companies are competing on positive environmental or social impacts as a way to differentiate themselves from a more conventional competition. You see it in the food domain. You see it in technology, not just the big tech companies, but Grab, I think, is a very interesting Southeast Asian company that actually IPO'd as a Deca unicorn and has struggled a little bit over the COVID years, but has a very interesting business model of lifting up low-income people in a business model that is also highly profitable. In fashion, you've got the move towards positive impact. That's also something that is making a big difference. In banking, you've got banks that are increasingly focused on doing good. And then you've got specialty companies, Regis Recycling in Oregon, and Grow Intelligence, fascinating company that uses artificial intelligence to help agricultural companies to understand the impact of climate change on their yields. Now, if you look at sustainability stock performance, for many years, certainly the last 20 years, there was always a dispute. Is actually a good sustainability, does this actually contribute to financial performance? And here you see the Standard & Poor 500 is the black line, and the blue line is the Standard & Poor 500 ESG index, which is really just the S&P 500 with the leading ESG companies, the companies that are ESG, meaning environmental, social, and governance. Those stocks were weighted more heavily in the 500 ESG index. And this opened in March 2020. You can see since it opened, since the launch date, you can see there's a slight outperformance. And I think it's important for us to recognize we're not trying to claim that, across the board, that statistically that sustainability stocks will always outperform the market, or certainly they won't do it by a large amount. But I think this is representative. It shows that at least the old idea, the myth that sustainability had to cost a company, that a company that wants to do good is actually going to have to give up profits, that wasn't grounded in facts. And then I want to show here on the top left of the slide a meta-study that was done in 2021 that looked at 1,000 studies that examined the relationship between environmental and social governance and corporate financial performance. They found 92% of the study showed non-negative relationship, and over 60% showed a statistically significant positive relationship. So I think we can put to bed the myth that sustainability has to cost a company something financially. In fact, if you do it right, if you know how to approach sustainability performance, environmental, social, governance, health performance, it can actually help you outperform your industry average. So some of this is understanding how sustainability creates business value by mitigating risks, by reducing energy and waste and materials intensity to the so-called eco-efficiencies, differentiating products, entering new markets, inspiring people and reputation, influencing industry standards, all of it driven by innovation. And now, when I introduced this idea in 2003, 20 years ago, this was fairly new. And even the bottom two levels were still rare to see. Now I think it's much more widely embraced, and companies are being more thoughtful, more calculating in how they use environmental, health, and social performance to create business value. Another one, and I promise not to make this a too technical a thing, but this is one I really want to share because I think it's so important, the notion of materiality adjusted financial performance. So what you see here is on the y-axis, you see performance on materially important issues can be high or low, and on the x-axis, you see performance on immaterial issues. And what we're looking at is annualized alphas of stock market returns, meaning the outperformance of a stock compared to the bench index where it's risk adjusted. So you take risk out of the picture. And so you can really compare. Now, what these two professors at Harvard did and published this in the Accounting Review is they looked at over 10,000 companies that were looked to see whether they were high performance on materially important issues and high performance on immaterial issues. So just to clarify, a materially important issue is something that actually the stakeholders of a company care about. It's an issue that shareholders care about also. An immaterial issue is one that just doesn't apply to that industry. So, for example, in the automobile industry, a material issue is fuel efficiency. And carbon emissions. An immaterial issue in the automobile industry is probably, palm oil sourcing, or something that the automobile industry just doesn't deal with very much. So this helps by discriminating between what's materially important and what's not material. Companies have moved from a check the box approach where they kind of did everything to focusing on what actually counts. Now, here's the results. In the upper right, you have companies that focused on everything. They both materially important issues and immaterial issues. They were high, and they outperformed by 1.5%, the average risk-adjusted benchmark. Those that said, we don't care about sustainability, we're not going to invest at all, had a minus 2.2% alpha, which is not surprising, and shows that if you don't invest at all in sustainability, now it actually ends up financially being a cost. And then you've got this funny outcome where there were some companies that focused on immaterial issues high, but didn't invest in materially important issues. And even here, it's almost the same as the average, but it's a slight underperformance. Okay, so the big question, right, is what's in the upper left? Well, in the upper left, you have a 4.8% average alpha. And that's what I think is something to focus on. Companies have gotten much better at focusing on what matters in their value chain, and being able to outperform or invest in those issues. And when they do so, it does make a financial difference to them. Also, companies are learning how to invest more in the circular economy, which increasingly is understood to be something that can actually save companies a lot of money. There was one estimate in the Ellen MacArthur Foundation from a number of years ago that moving to a circular economy could in fact generate more than $1 trillion a year, and more than 100,000 new jobs while reducing waste and emissions. So again, this is just a contrast with the cradle to grave idea that you take things out of the earth, you source them, you manufacture them, you distribute them, you sell them, and then they're dumped into nature again. That's kind of if those of you who remember Michael Porter's competitive strategy book in the 1980s, that's what it looked like. It was a linear. And the circular economy says, no, wait, we can't just be extracting stuff out, transforming it, and then dumping it. We need to figure out ways to either extract things that could go back into the natural, into the manufacturing cycle, or design products such that some of it can be put back into the biological cycle and absorbed back by Earth. And then the last thing I want to say here is that about the current state that's different is the government legislation has really stepped up. In the United States, in October of last year, the Inflation Reduction Act was actually the biggest climate bill, I think, in the world, certainly in the history of the United States, $740 billion. And it is in the form of tax credits for clean technology investments, loan guarantees for entrepreneurial projects, and even direct federal spending. It offers just a huge economic opportunity for business innovation to move towards clean energy. The European climate law, it was formally adopted in 2021 and aims to cut greenhouse gas emissions by 55% in 2030 and to make Europe climate neutral by 2050. And in India, the Security and Exchange Board of India took a major step in promoting ESG investing in 2020. But this July, SEBI requires the biggest 150 companies in India to be audited by a third party, so to show credibility of their disclosure, which actually makes it tougher than Europe or the United States in some ways. So this is suddenly a much different environment, very different market and social environment. where does this leave reporting and disclosure? Well, you may know that most companies now are being required by their investors, and in some cases by government, or it will be soon be required. And what you see here is, if this looks like a mess, it's because it is a mess of different reporting standards. The Carbon Disclosure Project, SASB, you may have heard of, Sustainability Accounting Standards Board, integrated reporting. All of these have now consolidated into IFRS, the International Foundation. That then has led to the creation of the International Sustainability Standards Board, which is the first truly global, truly international set of standards that consolidates many of the things that were done so far. It complements the Global Reporting Initiative and is influenced by the TCFD. And so what happened? Well, in June of this year, the ISSB issued two standards, IFRS S1 and IFRS S2, which is climate specific, to offer businesses around the world a complete and comparable set of standards for reporting. Remember, this is reporting and disclosure to investors. Now, I won't get into all of the pluses and minuses and whether this is single materiality or double materiality, but it's an important advance. And so in some ways we can say, wow, a lot is going on, a lot is going on in the sustainability, the corporate sustainability general environment. Should we be encouraged? So actually, let me just take a quick poll. Can you all put in the chat, please? Would you say, does this leave you feel encouraged? Do you think that this is indicative of the fact that business is now contributing to finally shaping a flourishing world? Or do you think that this is way insufficient? Or so any thoughts? I don't want to require everybody to do that, but any thoughts that you want to put in the encouraged, but we still have work to do, waking up to the reality. Yep. A good start, encouraged, movement, but at scale. That scale question is really good. Being non-cynical, any progress is good. Somewhat encouraged, but a bit cynical. Yeah, okay. So thank you for that. So now what we're going to do is try to answer that question by asking the question, is business in fact building a better world? Is it meaningful for business to be saying that it is doing all these things to tackle the big social and global challenges of our time, if those problems are getting worse, not better, which unfortunately many of you know are getting better. Climate change is getting worse, not better. Social inequality around the world is getting worse, not better. Employee disengagement and stress is getting worse, not better. So, in what sense can we really say business is building a better world? And this is where, just to give you a heads up, the view I'm going to share is that there is a long way to go, and we need to do something different in the way we engage business and we research these topics and try to influence practitioners. So what is the problem? So in my simple way, the way I think about this is sustainability in practice has largely been about doing less harm, especially in the environmental domain. It's about reducing, avoiding, minimizing, preventing. And so you can see, if all your focus is doing less harm, the best you can do is get to zero. So, if you say I'm emitting 100 million tons of CO2, and next year I'm going to cut it in half to 50 million tons of CO2. Is that good? Yes, that's wonderful. But you're still putting 50 more million tons into the environment. So you're continuing to do harm. You have, from the Stockholm Resilience Center, many of you may be familiar with this, a very useful way of thinking about a safe operating space in the middle. This is the notion that these scientists, including many Nobel scientists, of planetary boundaries and that there are environmental limits within which business can safely operate, and that if you cross the boundary into the orange space, you risk triggering nonlinear, abrupt environmental changes that can affect the whole system. So, chemical pollution such as plastic, for example, is way past the safe operating space. Same for climate change, species extinction, you've heard all about that. Land system change, the rate at which land is converted for crop. Biochemical flows such as phosphorus and the use of phosphorus stocks in the world, and the fixation of nitrogen in soil and water. Some of these have not yet been quantified or are not yet at a problem level, but clearly we are collectively and largely through business living and working in ways that are beyond the capacity of the earth to absorb these impacts. And this is just one thing I always come back to. I really find this an amazing way to think about it, that since CO2 in the atmosphere was first measured, this Keeling curve in 1958, it just continues to grow in spite of all these efforts. And so, when I started in the mid-1980s, I said my very first job, I remember hearing that the safe upper limit to avoid runaway climate change, Jim Hansen and others, was 350 parts per million. And it just continues to increase at an accelerating pace. April 28th of this year, we actually hit 425 parts per million. When you think that for the last 3 million years, we know for the last 3 million years through ice cores that it's never exceeded 300 parts per million. And then Kate Raworth, those of you who know her donut economics, makes an interesting point that we need not only to respect ecological boundaries, but we also should respect on the inside of the donut the social foundation that's needed. We should not fall below certain standards of health, food, water, energy, and so on. And while some indicators show progress, recent research also shows a worsening in some of these domains. For example, social support, gender equality, and social equity. And then, so where does this leave us? Okay, how do we think about this? Well, one way that I think we all need to think about is this distinction between doing less harm, having a positive impact that's incremental, and a positive impact that's system change. Okay, this is such an important thing that I just want to take a pause here and make it clear, because I realize so many business people get these ideas confused. They think that doing less harm, for example, emitting less CO2, is also somehow a positive impact, as I mentioned earlier. But in fact, if you're doing less harm in this direction, that's doing harm, right? The opposite direction is doing good, is making a positive impact. We have to get more companies to not only slow the rate of doing harm, but to start also adding positives to be able to increase their contributions or their impacts that help restore nature, that help increase human well-being, that improve our communities, the relationships in the communities that those companies have, and more generally, allow people and all animals on life, all animals on Earth to live in a more to thrive, to use Wayne's recent book title word. We need this kind of change. So to do that, businesses need to get clear about a distinction that, in my research, suggests that they are not clear. So I want to come back to that. Am I sharing this? No. What did I just do? Oh, here we go. Share screen, here we go. Okay, so this is the distinction that I would wish that businesses understood more. And I want to illustrate them a little bit. First of all, in the energy domain, you can see many energy companies, utilities, are focused on clean coal, for example, with carbon capture and storage, or fuel mix shift from coal to natural gas. Those are important things. And I'm not saying that they shouldn't be done, but let's recognize the fact that they continue to harm the environment. They just do it, and humans through the health impacts, but just at a slightly better rate. Then you've got some interesting, very tantalizing projects, such as, for example, in California and Nevada, you've got these water canals that they are now covering with solar panels, because by doing so, you get multiple benefits. First of all, the canals produce a place to put the solar panels. Secondly, the panels prevent evaporation by providing shade, and they reduce biofilm accumulation. So it's clever. It's got many benefits. It's a positive impact in that sense, but it's not at a scale that will transform American energy to a clean energy. So to make a positive impact at a system change, we need to think entirely new ways of generating and distributing energy. For example, Nordic biomass with carbon capture and storage, plus land use that increases carbon content in soil, plus afforestation and direct air capture. And I would say plus low cost, sustainably produced solar cells that can be easily afforded in low-income populations around the world. So is system change possible? It is. Yes, it is. But we first of all need to be clear about these distinctions if we're going to actually move in the direction we want. Innovation in aviation. The aviation industry is responsible for about 5% of all the CO2 emissions in the world. And we see many of the airline companies doing incremental stuff or reducing harm in some ways. For example, engines that cut costs and fuel by 20%. Biofuels is potentially an important one, could cut emissions up to 80%, but it's still doing less harm. And then you've got innovations such as the electric vertical takeoff and landing aircraft, which cut CO2 emissions and noise, but it is going to be limited. I mean, there's just an absolute, for the moment, absolute technological constraint. You just can't get batteries light enough and add enough of them to be able to do long distance air travel without having such a heavy plane that you get just a negative dynamic. So positive impact in the airline industry may have to be something like hydrogen powered, and there's growing enthusiasm for hydrogen powered air travel. And maybe in the years ahead, we will see that, where the hydrogen can be itself generated and compressed through biofuels and or solar, so that it's cleanly produced. But we also need to rethink long distance travel and how we meet, so that we don't end up with the amount of air travel that we do in today's world. So in conclusion on this part, it used to be that businesses would have their business strategy that the C-suite, the line managers would focus on, and then there was this parallel effort by a corporate social responsibility manager to try to develop a sustainability strategy, then to have ESG disclosure. All of that needs to be into one single integrated value creation strategy. And I'm happy to see many businesses around the world are moving in that direction. And then we also need to integrate doing less harm, positive impact, that's incremental, but also positive impact system change. All three are needed. Okay. I already covered a lot here. Shall we stop and have a brief discussion, or Surya, would you like me to go on to future directions?
What I suggest is that we go to future direction. So unless some of you here in the audience have really pressing questions, we cannot wait.
That's a good way to do it. Yeah. I mean, I think we could
Max has
take
some questions, so let's do it.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. Go ahead, Max.
Okay. I think the question you have not touched at all, which for me is essential, is two things. The one, just focusing on technical solutions. I don't think that is the way. Second, the more important question, how is it possible that highly capable and intelligent people keep going in the wrong direction? And I don't believe that they are not capable to distinguish between harmful and positive. I think everybody who wants to is able to see that. And actually, we know it since 50 years. And so the question for me is, why are people acting in ways that are really driving us all against the wall with high power and acceleration? That's for me the question we have to focus. And
Max, those are excellent questions. I appreciate it. And I don't know if Surya communicated behind the scenes for you to ask that question, because it sets perfectly up the future directions. We will talk about the fact that it's not just technological solutions, and we will talk about how do you engage intelligent people in moving in the right direction. Yes, Maria.
Maria. Yeah.
Thank you for the presentation. I think that the previous speaker referred to consciousness, because I see that all these models are brilliant, but we are forgetting about consciousness. There is a sensitive intelligence. So how can we improve consciousness so there might not be such a big doing gap, doing gap?
Maria, that's a wonderful question, wonderful observation, and I will also address that in fact, then Surya, allow me to go on. Yeah, I think other questions, please put them in the chat. But I realize now this is what we're going to. This is why future directions need to address these exact problems that Max and Maria, Florencia brought up. Okay, so. So first of all, I want to set this up by thinking about what we mean by value creation. The original notion of value creation was shareholder value creation, where the business purpose is profit maximization and organizing principles are efficiency. That's shareholder value. And then more recently, as we talked about, we've moved to this concept of shared value, where stakeholders and shareholders somehow are part of how we define value creation, which so includes a element of social responsibility and business purpose. And we move from just efficiency for its own sake to effectiveness, where we ask, value effective for what purpose? But then when we move to positive impact value, not just doing less harm, but positive impact value, we find a big divide. This is what we found in our research. We need to move from just social responsibility to a purpose of flourishing, of creating flourishing in the world. And the organizing principle has to become caring and wholeness. And you'll notice here the lettering is a little small, but the first two forms of value are about in an ontology of separateness. They come from a place where we see ourselves as separate from nature, separate from each other, and utility maximizing individuals where we're each out for ourselves. Positive impact value in the tradition of Vanilla Meadows and many others, including many of you on this call, is a shift from separateness to connectedness, where what it means to be human is to be connected to nature, is to be connected to others in a deeper way, and that caring and compassion are at least as important as survival, competition, and getting the most for yourself. So in the research that my colleague Fred Tsao did in 2014 to 2019, and then in a quant paper that a PhD student, Joe Leah, and I did in 2022, we looked at what does it take to cross the big divide from shared value to positive impact value. And we found that there were two variables that were most important. One was having a sense of greater purpose. In other words, how does a person go from wanting a business leader go from wanting to just pursue shared value to pursuing positive impact value? Well, the two factors that count the most are greater purpose and a consciousness of connectedness, which my colleagues on this call we've also called global consciousness. Consciousness of connecting. So, and Maria, you brought this up. So what is the role of consciousness? Well, first of all, what is this consciousness of connectedness or global consciousness? Here's how we define it. It's an individual state of being based on practices of connectedness and a sense of oneness with others and the world. So it's how we live as beings. It's not a theoretical or conceptual characteristic, if you will. It's a stage of being that is based on how we live our lives day to day. What practice do we actually have every day that connect us to our own life purpose, connect us to others, connect us to nature, connect us to the transcendent? And then how do we make sense of the experience of those practices? Well, we can turn to a more quantum view of reality that sees reality as composed of vibrational fields of energy that connect us in space and time, and in which consciousness is primary. So that's a revolution. It's a Kuhnian scientific revolution. It's an entirely different way of thinking about physical reality than what Western science over the last 350 years has told us. We go from particles and forces to a fabric of existence based on vibrational fields of energy. Then secondly, a global consciousness is also a collective phenomenon of seeing the whole and committing to solve global challenges such as climate change and social justice. And that is itself based on the shared set of assumptions that we are spirit-infused beings who are cooperative, compassionate, and caring. So it means redefining the collective. It means seeing ourselves as humans in a very different way. And then finally, it's an aspect of leadership development that integrates wisdom, practices, and non-dual ways of knowing to embrace oneness in pluralism. And to know more about this, I would like you to see at the bottom right of the slide, there's a link there, gci.earth. You can read more about my colleagues. Judy Neal is the lead for us, the executive director for Global Consciousness Institute, but you can see all 7 of us who are being part of this new organization to try to bring global consciousness into business, into education, and into change movement. So this is the model that Fred Tsao and I developed. We were looking at businesses that, if you start on the far right, businesses that pursue profit and growth on the one hand, and caring for future generations and the earth on the other hand. How do you get that, those 2 outcomes, instead of just the top outcome? Well, we looked at leadership models, shared leadership models, resonant leadership models, for example, from my colleague Richard Boyatzis on resonant leadership, that showed, what businesses that pursue both of these kind of outcomes typically have a leadership that includes shared vision, compassion, and what we can call relational energy in the leadership style. And it's not just the relationship between the boss and others. It's the relation. It's seeing people and the organization and its external environment in relational terms. So this was very interesting to see. This has been studied a lot, but the question we had is what leads to that? And as I mentioned earlier, we found that consciousness of connectedness and greater purpose explain this kind of leadership. Leaders who have a higher consciousness of connectedness and who have a greater sense of greater purpose are more likely to have these leadership characteristics. And then we ask, well, what are the antecedents to those? So what we found is that it's really not an intellectual. I'm sorry for those scholars who are looking for cognitive insights here. What I'm saying is that ultimately the independent variable is, hey, it's what is it that you do at a personal level, organizational level, and systems level to connect you, to experience connectedness, to have a direct, intuitive experience of oneness, because that is the nature of reality. Okay. So this model has many consequences. First of all, we understand now theories of change as not just being empirical rational. In other words, it's not just about making the business case for corporate sustainability. And it's not even adding normative re-educative arguments about, oh, if you look at our values, beliefs, and norms, societal norms, we need to do it. And it's not even adding further a third thing, which is the exercise of power with sanctions through regulations, government regulations, and compliance. We have tried these first three, at least since 1967, when they were first proposed in a paper by Chin and Ben, 1967, 1969. They have not been enough. So what is it that we're adding here? Well, the quantum leadership model adds a fourth theory of change. Not instead of the first three. You still need a business case. You still need normative arguments. You still need government coercion and compliance. But we also need to have people experience wholeness and connectedness through practices that connect them in a world where they feel incredibly disconnected. I hope I can share with you how, I feel that this is an idea that has existed for thousands of years, but the relevance today is acute because increasingly everything around us divides us, it fragments us, it leaves us feeling disconnected. So unless we are intentional in our own lives to have practices that give us this experience of wholeness and connectedness, just to make this very personal, before this webinar, I woke up early. I had tea to think about things. Then I went out on my run. And when I came back, I lay in nature, looking up at the trees and just waited for my breathing to go back to normal and just meditated for a little bit. And, that kind of practice has been transformative for me over the past 10 years. It has made me calmer, more centered. My wife would probably say that I'm a much better husband, a more reasonable husband. My kids would say I'm a better dad. So it's from daily practice. And what I hasten to say is that everyone has different practices. So this is not about trying to sell you on exercise or meditation, but something in your life. Something. Think about what is it that you have in your life that heals you, that makes you whole. So these practices of connectedness can be many different things: art and aesthetic gardening. It can be music, exercise, journaling, prayer. Whatever your practice is the right practice. But at their core, many of them do have this notion of being present to the perfection of the now. And the idea is that people who experience a greater sense of connectedness are more likely to care for others in future generations. So this is my last slide here, okay? And I want to shift gears a little bit and ask, how do we as scholars and academics actually engage others in changing the narrative? And I want to suggest 4 success factors. The first is we got to tell a different story, but a different story. How? We need more engaging and inspiring stories that offer a compelling vision of the future that works for 100% of humanity and all life on Earth. So how many of you, please put this in the chat again, what percentage of stories about the future are negative stories of doom, of collapse, of apocalypse, versus how many stories do we actually see that tell us that in the year 2050 or 2060, we could live in a grounded, science-grounded way, that there's evidence of a future that we could live that works for 100% of humanity and all life on Earth. Secondly, we need a new social imaginary based on prospection, which the clinical psychologist Marty Seligman has worked to develop this concept that human behavior is driven not just by our past experiences, but by our grounded imagination, values, and intentions. The future, the ideas we have about the future, pull us into change. So that's linked to the first part. If you have a story of your future that is positive and inspiring, and it's done prospectively, that can pull you into action. And then we need more promotion of positives about what goes right, rather than focusing on negatives about what goes wrong. This is the whole positive organizational scholarship work. The human behavior scientist Barbara Fredrickson, in her work on positivity, has shown that when you focus on what goes right, in her broaden and build theory, you get this upward spiral of resiliency in action. And finally, again, I just want to reemphasize, we need practices that lead to a direct intuitive experience of wholeness, and then reframing that through the lens of quantum science and perennial wisdom. Thank you.
Thank you, Chris. That was really quite challenging on some aspects for me, maybe also provocative for others which are in the audience. And I'm sure they have there are many questions. How will we proceed for the questions? Anyone who has already put some questions on the chat, or just raise your hand and I think we can take them at the top. Yeah. Yeah. Yes.
Wayne.
Hey, Chris, thanks for that. I'm interested to hear your reflections on how we overcome the skepticism gap when we talk to business about the need for this great leap, this transformation, the net positive, the thriving, the regenerative, when they feel that they're struggling to even do less harm, right? So how do we tell the story in a way that they feel this is achievable as well as necessary?
Well, Wayne, when I have the answer, I'll be sure to contact you first. I think we should, all of us, sit with that question. How do we do that? I believe that those 4 factors I listed at the end, engaging them in a positive story, even their own positive stories about what a flourishing future is. And, and when I say a story, I mean it in the Paul Zak sense of something that, where you can engage with it in such a way that your brain ends up producing oxytocin. That's what I try to do with business people, is really engage them in a story for themselves and for the world that has that engaging plot, if you will. And then what would it be like? What would it mean for them if their future was so desirable, so exciting? Wayne, you've probably seen some of this in Appreciative Inquiry Summits also, in the dream phase. We try to co-develop a future that is so engaging that people then get pulled towards it. But anyway, it's a big question. I'm not wanting to try to answer you, and I think it's one of the central questions of our time. Max.
Yeah, I see 2 more aspects you might want to talk about. I see a predominance of fear and of pressure in our whole social field, and particularly in business. And at the base of it is the idea of needing to achieve a better future, which is in itself just creating more pressure. And so I think we need an even deeper change of the way we approach change. Because from my experience, you need to come down to things how they are and how they want to develop. And it's not about forcing anything onto myself or others.
Mm-hmm.
But
Very
what I see is that really to bring business people to even consider that idea, I have no idea how to do that, because the pressure is so high, even from very regular, normal people in middle management positions. There's so much pressure, or teachers at school. They don't find time to breathe. So yeah, that's what I can see, and I have no solution
Max.
in your
Thank you.
Varun?
Varun.
Yeah.
Dean.
Yeah, sure thing, Chris. If you looked at the antecedents that you laid out, which was that of a greater purpose and building a collective or a global consciousness, those are at one level, you could look at those individually, you could look at it organizationally. And so supposing you were to look at an organizational antecedent, so it's all well and good for a leader to understand and feel part of a connected whole. How does an organization do that, right? And so there are some old techniques that perhaps need to be revisited. The fact is organizations can easily incorporate adaptive systems analysis and systems thinking and systems dynamics in their regular planning processes. So as a practitioner, I look at how can you systematize something? An example might be in a monthly management review or in a quarterly business review, having basically a systems view of new innovations that are being introduced, has the entire team collectively looking at consequences of something that might happen. And systems thinking forces you to think beyond yourself, beyond even the first layer or the second layer of beneficiaries, right? It forces you to think about all the possible side effects. It really forces you to take a global, connected, conscious view. So that might be an example of a practice. And again, coming from Case Western, we focus on practice, right? That might be an example of organizational practice that results in, and that's the form of organizationally practicing global connectedness. So I think that the literature should look at organizational practices as well, as opposed to putting all the burden on the individual to be the
absolutely. Absolutely. And I think you're bringing up the point that even at the organizational level, there are many different techniques to do that, many different methods. And appreciative inquiry summits are one organizational level method for bringing in systems thinking, but it's only one other one. So I think, that's a good reminder. Andrew.
Sure, thank you. When I think about the gap, my mind first goes to motivations, right? Both positive motivations and negative motivations. And then I jump to Maslow's hierarchy of needs, right? And that mostly gets talked about at the individual level, but I'm curious, and this is more of an observation rather than a question. I'm curious how that overlays at a corporate level and even at a societal level. In other words, is part of the problem that if the physiological needs and the safety needs, for example, of an organization, a business, or even of a society, if they're struggling to even get past that, is there even any hope to get to the higher level? In other words, do we need to focus first on getting them past those first couple layers in order to unlock the potential at all?
Right. Well, I think you're getting at something that has been studied quite a bit from a neuroscientific perspective. And that is, if the motivation is fear and you know, John Cotter's, are you familiar with John Cotter's work at Harvard? His
No.
work on his 8 steps to change management. You know, it starts, the first of his 8 steps is create a burning platform where, you know, everybody in the organization has to feel that they're going to lose their job and the sky is falling on them, to get their attention. You know, we know that the neuroscience of those approaches is to trigger the sympathetic nervous system, which puts you in fight or flight. And it's wonderful at getting people's attention, and it motivates them to focus. Because historically, when you had a saber-toothed tiger outside your cave and it was approaching, you focused to survive, right? But a lot of this neuroscience shows that if instead of focusing on what's wrong, instead, if you focus on giving people a desirable future and a path to get there, that engages the parasympathetic nervous system, which has been shown to, you know, increase creativity, broaden our horizons, and increase what Barbara Fredrickson calls consequential personal resources. So anyway, you know, I think partly what you're getting at is, should leaders and should organizations push people to change through fear, or should they pull people into change through a positive, desirable future and process for getting to that future? And most organizations, I think, make the wrong choice there. Uri.
Yes, yeah, thank you. And I'm reflecting about 2 things. One is about this, what is the way to change or observe awareness in scale and organizational technology, very old technology that I practice, which is called theater. And it's one of the ways for a system to see itself and reflect in a relational, emotional way about things. And I really loved when you mentioned what you did in the morning, because I think that's a key. These practices of reconnection, and actually I'm in the process of creating some platform application around how do we spread the stories of the lived experience moments of reconnection, the small practices, or that, and grow that on a relational way, and actually hacking the disconnecting system of technology. Right now, technology is unfortunately more working to get our attention, grabbing our attention to the digitalized device and economy built around it, and less on the physical, experiential nature world, which is our true source of well-being. So how do we somehow hack this and bring that as culture? And I feel what I want to say, I'm not coming from the business sector, I'm coming from the social activist artistic sector, but I feel there is a need to collaborate across these sectors, and change happens within the organization from external factors, and in the external factor, the organization. So the need to communicate across those sectors, business and non-business, and bring new ideas that are maybe old ideas.
Good points. Excellent points, Uri. Thank you. Yeah, it's very insightful. I also want to address what Shabazz Rakem said here. You know, are we speaking here just to the intelligentsia? Is this about, talking to those who are already in this conversation? How do we reach people who may be less educated or who are facing misinformation? And, you know, here, what I would come back to is that the practices, direct intuitive practices, walking in nature, having tea with the person who's important in your life, going to Panama to be able to spend some time on the beach. No, Anna Karina is here. I'm planning on coming to Panama with my wife in December. But, you know, things that give you a greater connection to nature, and then whatever other practices you have. You don't have to be part of the intelligentsia for those things. You know, very poor person can choose to live in a highly connected way with other people and with nature, even in urban environments. I think that's one of the things we forget, is that you can find calm and peace even in chaos. And now I don't want to suggest that that's open to everybody. There's probably 1 billion people in the world who are struggling to get food and water in conditions that would make that very difficult. But the practices are something that should be available to everybody. And then the other part, Shabazz, I want to say, is that the power of stories is that they should also be able to engage people, through an emotional chord rather than an intellectual chord. I started 25 years ago thinking that I was going to have to make the best cognitive conceptual business case to engage businesses. And now I'm in a very different place. I think the cognitive conceptual science only approach is not working. We still need science, we still need solid data, but what we need to do is engage people emotionally. We need to engage people spiritually. And to come back to what Varun challenged us at the very beginning in his introductory comments, we need to introduce living wisdom into business and into the lives of business people.
Yeah, Chris, Rupin, please. Yeah, please go ahead.
I just want to remind everyone that, well, just to bring it just more attention to it, that business people are humans too. They're the leaders, they
Wait, Rupin, can you say that again?
That business people and leaders are human too. They're human beings.
Yes. No, I'm sorry, I'm just being a little bit.
These are organizations. These are organizations made up of leaders that are human. A really good friend of mine, she's a president of a small medium company, and she worked very, very hard. She's very compassionate, and then she got cancer. And so she has been trying to lead her team in a very compassionate way, but she's shaking and she's trying to find new ways to lead the team. So there's a lot going on with leaders as well that we have to take into account. And perhaps there's also leaders that are more ready to do these kind of practices and bring it to their teams. So there's also a readiness factor.
Very true. Yeah, excellent, Rupin. Thank you.
Yeah. Chris, if you allow me, I have one question for you. Since I know that there are quite a few, let's say, PhD students here also attending the talk. Let's imagine that I am at the starting of my PhD journey, and I'm inspired by what you say, Chris. So, and you say, how do your question that you raised towards the end, how do scholars engage and can have an impact at their own level through the research work they are doing? So what would you tell me, what would you suggest, 2 or 3, let's say, kind of practical avenues of directing my research journey towards?
So in many PhD programs, there's a lot of push to learn quantitative and qualitative methods that allow you to do the kind of research that is likely to be accepted into academy journals and that will count for your tenure process. And a lot of that pressure is done irrespective of whether the research is relevant to society. So what I would say is it doesn't have to be a trade-off. You can do the same rigorous research that you're expected to do in your PhD program that will help you get tenure, and that will help you publish in top journals, and that will help you get a high citation account. But keep in mind that you have a choice to work on topics that are not just academic novelty questions, exploring a topic that, I looked at yesterday. I was in a PhD thesis conversation about somebody who was looking at the effects of temporal time on availability of employees, psychological availability, by looking at positive and negative feelings of the future, positive and negative feelings about the present and past, and how that changes engagement. It's interesting, but that's not something that's going to change the world of engagement, of employee engagement. I would rather that that PhD students really think carefully about, are they choosing a topic, and are they formulating research questions which are going to be highly relevant and have the ability to make social impact? Because that's what's needed today. I think scholarship for its own sake is now, what is needed. I'm not saying that it has to be about climate change or social equity. There are many, many different ways to think about what's relevant to society, but it should be in some way aimed at research and practice that can better the world, however you want to define that. I'm not sure if I answered your question, Surya.
Yeah, maybe some of our PhD audience would comment on that.
Yeah, sir, you mentioned about the practice part and the importance of the practice part, and it is kind of the antecedent to the good things like connectedness and awareness. So, most of the research that has been published on practices are mostly qualitative, quantitative experimental research, also short term. So how to connect that to directly to the outcome that we are seeking? So yeah, so I was finding it difficult because I feel less work has been done.
You can use different qualitative research methods, phenomenology, autoethnography, critical realism. Many of these would allow you to take a structured qualitative research approach to studying these questions.
Yeah.
I can follow up with you separately, Banajit, if you want.
Yes.
I can send some material on that.
Thank you, sir.
Maybe a last question, if there is nobody else who has a question. Anyone else would like to ask something to Chris? Okay, so let me jump in. Chris, now I changed my hat. I'm not a PhD student or scholar. I am a consultant, a management consultant, or change, let's say consulting, management, or whatever. So either I have my own consulting firm, which is like trying to craft a kind of different space in this consulting world, like ruled by all these dinosaurs and so on. Or I am maybe in a more university or an academic context where I am also engaged in consulting, like many, for example, you, Chris, who is doing both let's say, navigating both places. So what would you tell me when I am discussing with the CEO of a company, right, or of a governmental, let's say, organization, or a social, let's say, what would you tell me to convince me to make this big, let's say, jump, to cross this big divide?
So
I'm interested, I am like receptive. What would be your argument?
So what I advise all of you who might be interested in this question is to think about the sequencing of what you would tell that person. So the sequencing starts with you first engage them in the business conversation and show that sustainability can contribute to profit and growth. It can contribute to that CEO being professionally successful. And then you move from there to innovations and projects that are not just doing less harm, but are also making a positive impact or that are more scalable and that move us towards flourishing. And when that CEO realizes they can be successful and that they don't only have to do limited doing less harm things, but can also work on bigger projects that are aimed at flourishing, then you can talk about culture change. And when you talk about culture change, then you can talk about practices. What practices do they have in their life? Talk about their family. Talk about their own self-concept, about their deeper identity and how they relate to the world around them, and the need in organizations to be able to transform people and organizations to be more connected and caring to the world around them. So that sequence, you have to be sensitive to the right moment to say the right thing, but you can't start at the top. You can't start with quantum leadership. You have to start with most business people with, is this profitable? Is this going to be successful for you? And then why? And then build from there.
Yeah, thank you for that answer. Anyone else has a question for Chris?
Chris, might you share that second to last slide that you had with the mountain on it? Because there was a message there that might be nice to reflect on collectively.
This one?
We're not seeing it yet. Yeah,
You see it?
we do.
Yes.
Is this the one?
Yeah, I was just curious because we went by rather fast. So I didn't exactly catch it. And I thought, what else could we sort of sit with on that? Thanks.
Well, you allow me to share that this is the view I had from my high school in Switzerland.
Wow. No wonder you're so relaxed, Chris. You grew up watching that mountain.
It definitely made a lasting thing. All right. Anyway, I don't want to go over time with everybody, but thank you all for your engagement. And please, all of you, stay in touch with me. I'd appreciate it.
Well, dear.
Thanks a lot, Chris, for participating to this.
Cheers.
Thank you.